Hello, everyone. I'm Rachael Jacobs from the School of Education at Western Sydney University, and welcome to How to Read a Children's Book. So, why this video? It actually happened really recently at my university. I teach in the School of Education, which means my students are becoming primary school teachers. And they had an assignment to do, which was a lesson presentation. And the teaching was really outstanding. I was really impressed by their teaching skills. But when it came to pick up a children's book and read it to the class, I'm afraid it wasn't good. And it made me realize that this is not a skill that everybody just has, that this is something that people might not have been taught how to do, that people might not have practiced it. The majority of my students are coming from different language backgrounds as well, with many people English not being their first language. So it might be particularly challenging to read aloud in English. And also, it is just different. It is just different to what we usually do and how we relate to each other on a day-to-day basis. So I've created this video, How to Read to a Children's Book. Well, what was the problem? I'll actually show you. I've got a couple of children's books here, a few of my favorites, and I'm going to read to you the way that my students read out loud, and you see if you can see what the problem is. So the lessons began largely like this. Okay, everyone, come and sit down and we're going to have some story time. This is Where the Forest Meets the Sea by Jeannie Baker. My father knows a place we can only reach by boat. Not many people go there, and you have to know the way through the reef. When we arrive, cockatoos are rise from the forest in a squeaking cloud. My father says that there has been a forest here for over 100 million years. My father says there used to be crocodiles here and kangaroos that lived in trees. Maybe there still are. I follow a creek into the rainforest. I pretend it is 100 million years ago. Okay, end scene. So I think we can see what the problem is. I could identify two of the biggest problems. The first is that people were reading the words, they weren't reading the meaning. So they were reading word by word and they were reading with no expression. That was the first problem, is reading with no expression. The second problem was it was too fast, is that my students really needed to slow down a lot and really focus on the meaning, give more expression to their voice, pause so the children can see the pictures and really take in everything on this page, because that's what picture books are meant to do. They communicate in lots of different modalities. And so that's why it's really important to slow that process right down. So, what should you do? Here is a basic crash course in what to do when it's time to read a picture book. So, the first thing is set up the space the way that you want. And by the way, you could be reading to one child who's sitting on your lap. It could be bedtime story. It could be a whole class. On the whole, I am teaching my students to be reading to a whole class at once. So, set up the space the way you want. You say, everybody come and sit down for story time. We're going to our story corner. We're going to the front of the room, that designated place where you would read a story. And you start by setting yourself up in a really engaged way. So I'm sitting up straight. My back is straight. I'm super focused. My shoulders are relaxed. And that encourages the children to do the same. And you might say to them some specific things like, okay, everyone, it's story time now. So I'd like to see everyone sitting up straight, eyes towards the front so that you can see the pictures. Keep your hands to yourself. Any of those kind of things really help children to go through a process of getting ready to take in a story. It's part of the ritual, and it also helps to steady them to use their imaginations. And then you might start by introducing the book with attention to the pictures. You read slowly and with expression. You try and put in as much exaggerated expression as possible. There's no need to read to them like you're a cartoon character, like, good morning, boys and girls. There's no need to do that. Okay. You are still yourself. You're still an educator. You're still a parent. You're still the carer. You're still their friend or their cousin or their auntie, whoever you are. You're still that person. But it is important to make sure that there is expression on your whole face. That means your facial expressions. You might even get your body involved, even if you are sitting down, and definitely with your voice as well. You can ask questions along the way. You can ask questions such as, what do you think is happening in this picture? And try and get them drawn into using some of their own comprehension skills. Or for students who need a little bit of prompting, you might say, if they're talking about a cold day, you might say, do you remember when we had that really cold day and we were shivering? Okay. Or you might say, do you remember that day that we went to the beach? Or have you been to the beach? What did you see at the beach? And they will be able to name a few things that they can see. Of course, if they are non-verbal or not verbal at that stage, there is also different ways that you can get involved, asking them to point to different things or even asking them to reach out and touch the page. Although if you're in a whole class situation, that might not be appropriate. So there are a whole lot of different ways that you can engage children in reading and make it a better experience for this. And why is this important? Well, we know from research that if we read from with expression, it will help children understand the story. So they might not know every word, but through the combinations of the words and the pictures and your expression, they will learn language. That's how we learn, is through context. We don't just sit there doing, vocabulary tests the whole time. We learn language contextually. So it really does help their comprehension skills if you can use more expression. But I think the most important reason is that if you make story time engaging and enjoyable, then you are developing people who will have a lifelong love of reading, people who will read for the rest of their lives. And we know that reading and gathering knowledge and reading books in particular is one of the key stepping stones to development. It is even some people's way out of hardship. It is even some people's way out of disadvantage. Books are that magical. Okay, shall we have a go? I have my favorite book here, which is Rules of Summer by one of my favorite writers, Sean Tan. So I've got my book over here. And everyone, if you know you're going to do some story time, why don't you do some practice? Make sure it's not the first time you've ever read this book. And I guess I'm talking about a class situation or something like that. If your little one plucks a book off the shelf and goes up to you to read it, you don't need to say, oh no, sorry, Auntie Rachel hasn't read that one yet. Give it a go. But in a class situation, practice, practice, practice. That's what's going to make you good at this, is if you feel comfortable and familiar, then the children are going to feel comfortable as well. Okay, here we go. Rules of Summer by Sean Tan. What do you think this story might be about? Can you see any characters? Do you think it's just people in this book? There's a little couple of questions so you can start to get your children engaged. What's on this page? Who do you think these people are? This is what I remember about last summer. Never leave a red sock on the clothesline. Never eat the last olive at a party. Do you like olives? I love olives. Never drop your jar. Never leave the back door open overnight. Never step on a snail. Hands up who's stepped on a snail. What did it feel like? Feels a bit like that, doesn't it? Never be late for a parade. Never ruin a perfect plan. What's the plan? Never argue with an umpire. It's a good rule, isn't it? Never give your keys to a stranger. What might happen? It's really moved in, isn't it? Okay, we're going to leave the book there and we'll have more story time next lesson. Okay, so slow, lots of expression, lots of pauses. You don't have to pause after every page to ask questions. I just gave you lots and lots of examples. You will notice that there was a couple of times that I didn't get the words exactly right, and that's okay. You might have a child who knows the book really well, and don't worry, they will correct you. But that's okay if you don't read it word to word. But I think the most important thing is practice, practice, practice. So now you should go off and find a children's book and sit down with somebody. It can be anyone, your partner, it can be a brother or sister, it can be mum or dad, and say, I actually need this to help me. Or you can go and find a child in your family or your friend circle that you know and say, I'd really like to read you a story today. Is that okay? If you do happen to have a working with children check, you can say to a local school or an early learning centre that you're already connected with, I'd like to come in and do story time. It might only be 15 minutes or something like that, but this is all good practice that is going to give you these skills for life. Reading aloud to children is a core skill for teachers. It is absolutely mandatory. You will do it as part of your career. You are going to get better at it as well. And it is usually one of the first things that people are asked to do when they're going to prac. So it is definitely something that you should develop. All right, everyone, go grab a book and start practicing, and happy reading.